A horse is your friend. A horse is your friend. It gives you freedom, fulfillment, takes care of your health and condition. It brings you joy and peace. A horse allows you to achieve your most desired goals in sports and in life. It helps you forget your worries, pursue your passions, and boost your self-confidence. What will you give in return for its friendship and devotion? Take care of its health. The Pets Diag hair test will allow you to assess the condition of your horse. Skin and hair, muscles, joints, and hooves, immunity, growth and breeding activity. Check their condition and take measures based on our recommendations. Order a test on petsdiag.com and send us a mane hair sample. Remember, your horse counts on you. Pets Diag.
Hello, hello. Please confirm that you hear me. Hello, Camilla. How are you?
Very well, thanks. How are you?
Fine, thank you very much. Okay, so we are currently at one of the most important equestrian events in Poland, so sorry for any noise. I'm Marcin Maciąg. I'm the CEO and founder of Pets Diag Laboratory. We specialize in testing elements in horse hair. This is an innovative test that allows you to improve the horse's performance and condition by determining the lots of heavy metals and the level of micro and micro elements. Our partner in the UE countries, because I know that several people here on this webinar are from the UE, so our partner in UE is Stallion Equine. So if you want to know more information about our services, about our tests, please contact with Stallion. And one of our areas of activity is also education. We try regularly organize webinars with equestrian experts to share with our clients the latest science in the field of horse health. And this is the reason why we are meeting today. And our host today is Camilla Whishaw. Camilla is a highly respected and sought after equine naturopath and experienced horsewoman. Based in Australia, Camilla consults globally on challenging equine health cases, working both independently and in collaboration with equine vets and health care professionals. Camilla, it's a great pleasure for us to have you here on this webinar with a great topic. So please start your webinar.
Thanks very much, Martin. So good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you're tuning in from. If I say good evening throughout the webinar, it's because it is nighttime here in Australia, but I appreciate that it's morning and afternoon elsewhere. So as Martin has said, tonight's presentation is on stallion health and fertility and looking at it from a holistic aspect. So in tonight's webinar, we will look at the importance of a holistic approach when it comes to stallion health and fertility. We'll briefly look at different components of fertility. We'll look at factors which influence testosterone and libido. So two really important components when we're dealing with stallions, breeding stallions. We will look at some really key factors that impact stallion fertility. So body composition, environment, medications used in stallions or in horses in general, but their effects on stallions and their fertility. We'll look at how stress affects fertility in the stallion. We will look at the effects of shuttling stallions. So those are our stallions who do dual hemisphere, so season to season. We'll briefly touch on considerations with the aging stallion. We'll touch on gastrointestinal health and nutrition and how they tie into reproductive efficiency. We will look at supplement use in stallions. And to conclude, we'll just look at how best to address fertility issues in a stallion using a holistic therapeutic approach. So why is stallion health and reproduction important? Well, we know that for the vast majority of breeding establishments, that stallions are a major revenue generator for studs and breeding operations. There's very little conventional pharmaceuticals can do, so conventional drugs, to help improve fertility and or libido in a stallion. So if we've got a stallion with poor fertility or a stallion with not great libido, we're really limited in what we can do from a medication aspect to help those stallions. So that's one of the many reasons why we need to take a really holistic approach and look at all the reasons why a stallion might be struggling with fertility and or libido. If there's any area of horse health and well-being where the way we manage a horse, their nutrition, the way we exercise our horse can really influence outcomes, it's certainly infertility, which is great news if you've got a stallion that has fertility issues. Correctly employed nutraceuticals, so nutritional supplements and herbal medicines can yield extremely beneficial outcomes in a stallion that has fertility issues or libido issues. Looking at stallion fertility holistically, we need to take a step back because I think in the moment it can be really easy to see a stallion. Next slide. It's really easy to just see individual aspects of fertility. So we can get really hung up on fertility levels or seminal analysis or a stallion's libido, and we tend to view those things in isolation, yet they're all part of a holistic picture. When it comes to fertility or libido challenges in a stallion, there's usually many factors which are contributing to it. Again, from a reductionistic approach, it's easy for us just to get stuck on one thing, which we think is a cause, because we love to have a cause and effect. But generally, it's a compound of factors, as we'll cover in the webinar, which may be contributing to that poor fertility and or libido. Often on that too, fertility is one thing which we're measuring and getting tangible results. So although there may be other nutritional or health consequences or factors contributing, because we are so focused on a stallion's fertility, that is what can bring our attention to problems with that stallion. The way fertility and reproduction and hormones work, to simplify it, is through what we call the hypothalamus pituitary gonadal axis, or the HPG axis. So the hypothalamus influences the pituitary, which influences the testes and hormone production. If we get anything which changes the function of the hypothalamus or pituitary, that in turn will influence testosterone production and gonadal function in the stallion. So again, taking a holistic approach rather than just focusing on the testes and testosterone, we need to look at the stallion as a whole horse. On that, fertility is a reflection of a stallion's overall general health and well-being. So if we want good fertility levels, we want a healthy stallion. We don't often think about semen in this regard, but semen is effectively a byproduct of the body and a way for a stallion to clear heavy metals or toxins from the body. So if a stallion's got a heavy metal burden or high levels of chemicals in its body, semen is one passage to get those substances out of the body. So again, remembering that reproductive function shouldn't be seen in isolation. Semen and sperm need nutrients to be synthesized. We'll get further into the role of nutrition in the webinar, but if we're not giving our stallion the core nutrients it needs to make healthy sperm and semen, he can't make them from nothing. So we need to have the dietary means in there for our stallion to make those things. Further to that, for the sperm to be healthy and motile, it needs more nutrients than just basic sperm production alone. So spermatogenesis is the origin and development of sperm cells within the testes. For stallions, this takes about 55 to 57 days. So when we have a fertility issue with a stallion, when something goes wrong and we're aware of it, so often the first time we're aware of it, if we're doing live covers, so in the thoroughbred industry, is when the mare comes up for an initial scan. And if we get a run of mares who test negative or aren't in foal, then we know we've got an issue. For AI, it'll be when we're analysing the semen. We need to remember this in that when we look at sperm or semen and there are issues, we need to think what was happening 55 to 57 days prior to that moment. I think when stud masters or stallion managers see problems with fertility, they think, what's happening now? What's gone wrong now? It's generally not what's gone wrong now. It's what has happened 55 to 57 days ago when that sperm was starting to be formed. So when we talk about fertility, we want a fertility level of at least 60% of mares per cycle positive in foal to that stallion. Factors which make up fertility include testosterone levels in the stallion, sperm motility, progressive sperm motility, so the sperm that can actually swim forward and in the right direction, sperm morphology, sperm count and concentration, the gel fraction of semen, and if we're getting quite technical, we can look at DNA fragmentation of sperm. So when we're talking about testosterone in the stallion, obviously this is one of the key hormones involved in the production of semen and sperm and needed for good fertility. We know that peak production of testosterone occurs in the morning. So if we're looking at live cover situations, so again, when we're doing in-hand breeding, so in the thoroughbred industry, our stallions' natural levels of testosterone are highest in the morning. We know that the amount of testosterone a stallion can produce declines with advancing age. So sort of once a stallion hits 15, 16, 17, his levels will naturally decline. Now, I've put an asterisk next to that in that there are a lot of stallions I've been involved in their treatment with and older stallions. And although at the time of consultation, before we've got involved with the treatment plan, their levels have been quite low for various reasons. When we've implemented an effective treatment plan, we've been able to get those levels up much, much higher. So although without intervention, their testosterone levels would naturally decline with age, if we are doing everything we can to support them from a nutritional perspective, from a herbal medicine perspective, from a management perspective, some of those stallions, older stallions, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, have had much higher testosterone levels at that age than they ever did when they were younger. We will talk about stress more in the presentation, but chronic stress decreases testosterone. And I think it's really, really important that we don't underestimate the effects of stress on our stallion in terms of fertility and testosterone levels. So what are some of the factors that decrease testosterone levels? Obviously, remembering that we want to do everything we can to promote really healthy and high testosterone levels in our stallions. We know that high body fat amounts, so our overweight stallions, have lower testosterone levels. We know that many medications can reduce testosterone levels. For example, some non-steroidal anti-inflammatories and omeprazole, so some of our ulcer medications. As I said before, stress, advancing age, racehorses or horses with a past history of anabolic steroid use. Also the use of altrenogests, so Regulate or ReadyServe, which in some cases sometimes is used in colts or stallions before they go to stud, where they're around other horses, particularly mares or fillies, if they want to reduce their testosterone exhibiting behaviour, so their stallion-like behaviour. But that can have really significant consequences down the track when we go to breed with that stallion. Synthetic testosterone use, so again, this can be used it's very rarely used, but sometimes it can be in desperation to try and increase the stallion's libido or his testosterone levels, in the way it interferes with negative feedback and the HBG axis, that in turn will decrease the stallion's testosterone production. We have what are called environmental xenoestrogens. So xenoestrogens are substances which are foreign estrogens, but they're close enough in a molecular structure to estrogen that they bind to estrogen receptors and mimic estrogen activity. And if we've got a high binding or a high load of xenoestrogens, that in turn will decrease testosterone levels. The evidence in it is a bit inconclusive in animals, but I think we need to be aware that a high intake of soy products potentially could decrease testosterone levels. Soy, in that it's a properly heat-treated soy, should I say, is a useful addition in many diets, in that it's a very good source of protein, particularly the amino acid lysine, which can be low in horse diets. So it can be a very useful feed source for all horses. But if we have a stallion with low testosterone levels and a very, very high soy intake, then that's certainly something we need to address. Excessive inflammation can certainly decrease testosterone levels. And due to the effects of changes in hormonal levels, remembering that testosterone production is highest first thing in the morning, so it's got a circadian rhythm. If we are interrupting our horses late at night, so again, looking at when we do live breeding, in-hand breeding, so if we are doing midnight covers or 10 p.m. covers, 9:30 p.m. covers, they potentially affect our stallion's production of testosterone by interfering with its natural circadian rhythm. Also, leaving lights on in stables overnight can potentially also interfere with its natural circadian rhythm. So if we look at libido, we all know how frustrating it can be if we've got a stallion who's got a high book of mares and we are struggling with his libido. This is one area with our stallions where there's also quite a psychological component or a previous experience component, but there is also a chemical and hormonal component. So again, it's why it's really important to take a holistic approach when we're looking at stallion health and libido. So some things which definitely influence libido are previous experiences for that stallion, whether they be good or bad. In terms of bad experiences, they're not just confined to the breeding shed or breeding situation. If we've had a stallion who's been a show horse, who's been out in competition and he's been reprimanded for his behaviour, for his stallion-like behaviour, that in turn can backfire when that stallion goes to stud. Poor experience early in breeding career. So if a stallion has been handled by someone incompetent early in his breeding career, or he's been kicked or hurt early on, that can really damage libido. And the psychological effects of that can really stand for quite some time. Fear. When we're looking at older or particularly intelligent stallions, they can get really fussy and smart and won't just jump anything. Again, these stallions can get quite savvy and quite coy, and they can know better than us when the mare is really ready to be covered. Certainly the attitude and the confidence of whoever's handling the stallion or the handlers, they can certainly influence libido. There are definitely some stallions out there who are what we call shy breeders. From a neurochemical perspective, looking at neurotransmitter production and balance. So neurotransmitters can influence a stallion's mood, temperament, behaviour. One of those neurotransmitters in particular, GABA, is known to be associated with sexual arousal in a stallion. So again, from a holistic approach, sometimes we need to look at supporting the production of GABA to help with libido. Pain, if a stallion's in pain when he's covering, that can certainly influence libido. Young stallions can struggle with libido. Similar to testosterone levels, previous use of anabolic steroids can influence libido. If a stallion's on a stud or in a barn where there are a lot of stallions, particularly established stallions, and that is this stallion's young or new or is low in the pecking order, that can certainly dampen his libido. If you think about some barn situations, you'll have really popular stallions who are constantly going out for covers, and you might have a stallion that doesn't go out so much or doesn't have such a book of mares, and that can really affect libido. Fatigue, so if our stallion's not fit for the job or is not getting correct nutrition, that can certainly impact libido, as can insufficient fitness, so they tend to go hand in hand. Number of mares, so again, that contributes to fatigue. If a stallion's got a very large book of mares, that can definitely influence libido. If a stallion's overly stressed, so if he's not settled in his environment or he's suffering from illness or injury. High peripheral conversion of testosterone to estrogen. So again, in many, not all, but many cases, lower testosterone levels can contribute to reduced libido. And we know that fatter horses, again, have lower testosterone levels because that fat tissue acts as what we call an endocrine organ. So it produces its own set of hormones, and fat promotes the production of a type of estrogen. And in turn, there's a lower level of testosterone. We know that FSH, LH, and testosterone levels can certainly play a role in libido. So again, really honing in on body composition. So for a stallion, ideally body condition should be a score of 5 to 6 on the Henneke scale, which is the scale of 1 to 9 in terms of body conditioning scores. What this means when we look at a stallion is that their ribs cannot physically be seen while they're stationary, but we're easily able to feel them with light to moderate pressure. So how body composition can affect fertility and libido is obviously, again, through that peripheral conversion of testosterone to estrogen, so reduction in testosterone levels. But from a physical sense, every time a stallion has to jump a mare or a phantom, every time they cover, they have to lift that weight up. That's more stress on their joints, on their musculoskeletal system. The heavier a stallion is, the more weight he has to get up. So again, we know that higher body fat levels lead to hormonal changes, reduced testosterone and free testosterone levels. We also know that those hormonal changes can increase DNA fragmentation rate of sperm. So again, we're getting sperm that's more likely to be damaged. Also, if a stallion is really obese, then that increased fat can lead to increased testicular temperature, which adversely affects spermatogenesis. Another thing is when a stallion has high levels of inflammation, that causes high levels of what we call oxidative stress within the stallion, and that uses up really specific nutrients that are to try and counteract that inflammation and stress. And some of those nutrients are nutrients which are really, really important for healthy sperm and testosterone production. So things like selenium and zinc and vitamin E. So the higher body fat levels a stallion has, the more inflammation he has, and the quicker he churns through those nutrients. And if those nutrients are used to try and counteract that inflammation, then those nutrients aren't available for testosterone and sperm production. So fitness and body composition aren't mutually exclusive. There is quite a bit of overlap there. We need to ask ourselves, is our stallion properly fit for the job? I think it can be really easy for us in an off-season to turn a stallion out in a paddock. Might be a small paddock, feed him, each day, but not pay attention to his fitness. And then we'll pull him out of the paddock come stud season and expect him to be covering at least once, if not 2, 3, or more times a day. A stallion that's been sitting around in his paddock is really not fit for a job to go straight into stud season. On that, there's been an interesting bit of research done by a lady called 𝐘𝐚𝐫𝐬 out of the US, and she studies the activity of semi-feral pony populations. From these, we know that on average, when a pony or a horse is in nature, they cover 16 to 160 kilometres per day through incidental activity. So that's 10 to 100 miles per day. Our stallions who are enclosed in a small paddock and, stallions that spend time in stables or boxes, they are not doing any level of incidental activity anywhere near that. So again, the way we confine them can certainly impact their fitness levels, which in turn has flow-on effects to fertility. And we know improved levels of fitness are associated with improved testosterone levels and improved fertility parameters. So again, if you've got a stallion that is busy, for stud season, but then sits out in his paddock or stands out in his paddock for the rest of the season and then is brought straight in to cover mares again, really looking at how you can implement an off-season fitness program and fitness program leading into the stud season can help you immensely. On that, turn your stallion out as much as possible in paddocks as opposed to keeping him stabled or in a box. In terms of fitness, there are many mechanisms we can use to help promote fitness in our horse, whether that be ridden work, putting our horse on a horse walker, so an automatic walker, hand walking them. I've known of some stallions even to be swum. So again, implementing a routine to ensure that our stallion is properly fit for the job is important for testosterone levels, it's important for fertility, it's important for libido, and it's really also important so he's prepared from a musculoskeletal perspective. Some stallions will really benefit from continued exercise during their breeding season as well. Now, I've put a question mark next to that in that some stallions, are covering 3 or 4 mares a day and have a quite full-on season and probably just need the time between covers to be turned out and be a horse in a paddock. But a stallion with a lesser book of mares is probably going to be better off kept in a regular fitness routine. Additional benefits of fitness in our stallions include that exercise promotes peripheral blood flow, so blood to the testes, which is important for production of healthy sperm and semen. It's needed to regulate blood glucose levels. Now, if we get high blood glucose levels in our horse, levels of insulin resistance, anything like that, they impair seminal parameters. So again, if we want fit sperm that swim well, that look good, that do their job, we need our stallions to be fit. We also know that exercise is associated with the production of one of those really important neurotransmitters involved in arousal, so GABA. So regular exercise helps with GABA production. So if we want our stallion feeling good, feeling fit, ready to do the job, exercise is really important to help with that. So it's really important to consider the role of environment and toxins when we're thinking about fertility. So there are definitely things in a horse's environment that can adversely affect fertility parameters. If we're looking at a stable setting, some of the pesticides we commonly use, and particularly in insect misting sprays, can harm sperm health directly. They also can increase that peripheral conversion of testosterone to estrogen. So again, getting our stallions' hormones out of whack. If our stallions are on a farm environment or, in a rural area, the use of pesticides, herbicides and fungicides, many different ones that are commonly used in agricultural settings, can certainly have negative effects on fertility parameters. Proximity to mines is a really important one and something that I see quite a lot of here in Australia, and I know in parts of the US as well. So we know that mining, and particularly open cut mines, expose our animals and the environments to high levels of many heavy metals, particularly cadmium. This is really important in that cadmium displaces zinc and other key minerals needed for healthy sperm production and needed for healthy testosterone levels. those heavy metals displace those nutrients, which are so important across the board for fertility. I haven't put it on the slides, but certainly proximity to airports, again, for the exposure from aircraft, jet stream, that's the word I'm after. They can certainly harm fertility levels as well. Smoking, this is a big one in that I think many people do smoke around horses. Many people that handle horses smoke. That cadmium contained in secondhand cigarette smoke, again, can displace those minerals. And xenoestrogens, again, certainly have an impact on our horses' fertility, our stallions' fertility. So smoking should be a definite no-no, if not for the person who's smoking, people's health, then definitely for the stallion's health. Toxins, including phenols and phthalate esters. So these are often found in what we call personal care products. But if we think about our horses, shampoos, mane detangling sprays, coat shining sprays. So again, if we've got a stallion who's got even slightly compromised fertility levels, we want to be thinking long and hard about the products we spray on them, what we groom them with, what we paint on their hooves. Endocrine disruptors. So these are certain insecticides and detergent-derived products. It's a really interesting study. It was done in rats, but it just showed the one exposure of pregnant females to the fungicide 𝐕𝐢𝐝𝐻, which is commonly used in the wine industry, disrupted spermatogenesis in more than 90% of the male offspring for at least 4 generations. Via an exclusively transmitted effect through the male germline. So I think that goes to remind us that we just can't discount what's happening in the environment around our horses and the impacts that can have. So any way we can reduce environmental exposure to toxins, we should be really honing in on. So if we've got shuttle stallions or stallions that serve mares in dual hemisphere, so again, this is more relative to live covers. When we do AI, we've got the joys of being able to ship semen worldwide. But in our thoroughbred industry, we must do live cover. This can impact fertility through several mechanisms. So again, stress, and we will delve into stress further in a few slides. Changes in management, nutrition, and environment. So stallions will typically go from one setting, one lot of routine, one lot of feeds and medications when they're in the northern hemisphere, and go to a completely different setup, feed, nutrition, management in the southern hemisphere. And this is a massive source of stress on those stallions. It also results in significant changes in gut microflora, which impacts fertility. There's a little bit of research around jet lag and hormonal changes associated with jet lag in horses, and we think it takes around 11 days for horses to readjust to a new time zone. I think we need to stop and consider what repeated long-term disruption of a horse's circadian rhythms will do, which comes about when we suddenly go from summer, the southern hemisphere, and then come down to winter. Or vice versa, northern hemisphere, southern hemisphere. We know that disruption in circadian rhythms can decrease testosterone and sperm counts. The reason I've put question marks is there has been some research done into the effects of stallion fertility in shuttle stallions or dual hemisphere stallions, and it didn't really show that it changed fertility much. However, I think that was one study, and I think the more we look at the different parameters which influence fertility, we certainly can't discount the effects of shuttling our stallions and what that can do to their long-term fertility. We also need to remember that in nature, there's a normal down season for our stallions, so they're not breeding for the majority of the year. They get a chance through winter and autumn to really wind down, whereas if we've got a stallion who's covering in both hemispheres, he doesn't get that natural break. Also, if we're keeping our stallions under lights in both the Northern Hemisphere and Southern Hemisphere at night time, that can further disrupt his circadian rhythm. Which leads us to our next slide, artificial lighting. So lighting can be used to stimulate a stallion's reproductive system. The general consensus for the amount of light or the duration of light to use to help hasten breeding season is about 16 hours a day. So we can bring our stallions' breeding season artificially forward. The kickback with this is that stallions will taper off earlier in the season if we bring their season forward. Now, if we bring their season forward and therefore they shut down, naturally their testosterone levels decline and their fertility goes down, then this generally occurs when we've got those really difficult problem pregnancy mares who are coming back for their second or third visit. So they're coming back, these challenging mares to get in foal are coming back when our stallion's testosterone levels and his fertility levels are naturally on the decline. On the artificial lighting too, or lighting during nighttime, or any interaction with our horses or stallions at nighttime too, when we interact with them at night and use light, we disturb their circadian rhythm, their circadian clocks. That in turn affects their sleep, their cortisol or their stress levels, and in turn can affect fertility parameters. So they're just things to keep in mind. And something I always think of when we've got a stallion with a really heavy book and he's doing a lot of midnight covers, I go, what is happening to his circadian rhythm and what are the long-term effects on his testosterone levels with that? So for the stallion that spends a lot of time in a stable, that can certainly impact fertility through multiple mechanisms. So again, a stallion that's kept in a stable or spends the majority of his time in a stable or a box stall compared to being outside in a paddock, he has a sufficient reduction in that natural exercise. So he's moving less, and this in turn affects fitness levels, testosterone levels, seminal parameters. That stallion is, particularly if we are not diligent with diet and management intervention, he's at an increased risk of insulin resistance and high levels of inflammation. We know that activity and movement is needed for healthy sperm. So again, through that reduction of activity, being in a stable, those parameters affected. You're more likely to have issues with stallion being a bit more overweight and less muscle mass, just through, again, that lack of incidental exercise. Standing around, there's more weight and more stress on his joints, and they're not getting that strength and overall musculoskeletal strength from being out and about. Horses, like humans, synthesize vitamin D through the action of sunlight on their coat. In the case of horses, in us, it's our skin. If our horse is stabled predominantly, and or if he's out and he's wearing a rug or a sheet, his vitamin D levels are going to be much, much lower. So his ability to synthesize vitamin D is much lower. And vitamin D isn't commonly found in high levels in feed. So horses really need to be getting that sunlight to help manufacture that vitamin D or synthesize vitamin D. Vitamin D is a crucial nutrient when it comes to sperm health, testosterone levels, GABA production. So again, all those factors, reducing inflammation that we've talked about earlier, which really contribute to healthy fertility in a stallion. In some, but not all cases, but certainly I think more often than not, we will find that a stallion who spends the majority of his time in stable is more likely to not have sufficient fibre in his diet, which is really important for gut health. We'll touch on gut health later in this presentation, but we did a specific gastrointestinal and gut health presentation earlier this year with Pets Diag, and I would suggest that if you haven't seen that or you want to refresh your memory, to jump onto the website and check that out, just to see, how important fibre is and the systemic effect of good gut health or poor gut health on a horse. In terms of stabling or keeping our stallions in box stalls, how the barn is set up and its the ability of a stallion to have social interaction with other horses, whether they be stallions or whether they're able to see mares outside, or a lack of that, can really influence testosterone levels and libido. Again, that incidental activity out and about in a paddock, which they don't get in a stable, is really important for healthy blood flow, regulating blood glucose levels and helping to control insulin levels, thereby keeping testosterone levels or helping to keep testosterone levels high or at a good level. So inflammation is a really important consideration when we're looking at testosterone levels and fertility. So we know that there are many, many, many causes of inflammation in horses. Some of these are as simple as the diet we feed, and the diet is honestly one of the biggest contributors. Gastrointestinal microflora and intestinal hyperpermeability. Again, go back to that gastrointestinal health webinar to get a better background on that or refresh your memory on that. We know that diets high in omega-6 and comparatively low in omega-3 fatty acids contribute to inflammation. We know that high levels or ongoing stress contributes to inflammation. Inflammation, in turn, decreases testosterone levels. It can decrease sperm count. It can result in impaired morphology and progressive motility of the sperm, so not healthy-looking sperm and sperm that don't swim so well. And it can change gene signaling and cell integrity and cause oxidative stress to sperm. So they're all things that don't correlate with healthy fertility. The use of medications, and even quite common ones and ones we often don't give second thought to, can really influence a stallion's fertility and or his libido. And it's one of the areas I think we really, really need to think long and hard about. The ironic thing is, particularly in the case of non-steroidal anti-inflammatories or ulcer medications, is often people don't view these as medications or don't stop and consider their use to potentially cause any troubles. So some of the medications we know which can really influence fertility include our proton pump inhibitors. So that includes omeprazole or esomeprazole, both in oral and injectable forms. So these are medications commonly used in terms of ulcer treatment. We know that PPI, so proton pump inhibitors, can reduce sperm motility and progressive motility. So again, the ability of our sperm to swim and swim towards the egg. We know it's associated with increased morphological abnormalities, so funky looking sperm. It can be associated with a decreased sperm count, changes in luteinizing hormone and follicle stimulating hormone, and decreased testosterone. Recently, I think it was a study in rats, they found that PPIs may further affect fertility by inhibiting a specific enzyme needed in sperm for them to be able to be synthesized properly. So the more time goes on, the more we're learning about how, again, some of these medications which are used so routinely, how they can impact fertility. Ranitidine, so that's a histamine receptor antagonist, which is lesser used in ulcer treatment, but can be used, may also affect fertility parameters. And non-steroidal anti-inflammatories, so phenylbutazone, bute, PBZ, flunixon, banamine, they can decrease testosterone production. An interesting case I had was an older horse who was regularly kept on bute to help with joint health, to try and keep him more comfortable. That was further compounding his fertility issues. So again, remembering that he's an older horse and his fertility levels would naturally be declining. For this horse in particular, that was one of the main factors that I believe to be contributing to his poorer fertility. And when we looked at both nutraceutical and herbal medicine alternatives for the bute he was kept on, his fertility levels significantly improved. For that horse, again, it was an example of when people use a medication routinely but don't really consider it a medication. I remember going into that case and taking his history and asking the stallion manager if the stallion was on any medications, and he said no. And then I delved further and we went through his history and found out he was on bute daily. So again, just a reminder of how important it is to go through thoroughly what a horse is on. Antibiotics can decrease sperm count. They can reduce testosterone levels and in some cases reduce sperm viability. So some of our antibiotics. So again, being really judicious in if and when we need to use these medications and not just using them without really good reason and without being aware of the potential side effects. Antihistamines. So again, often these aren't, people don't consider these as medications, yet they can have significant effects on the production of testosterone. They can reduce sperm count and lower sperm quality, and can also alter the morphology and motility of sperm. Corticosteroids can certainly decrease sperm counts or have effects on fertility parameters. Diazepam, so our Valium, again, it's occasionally used to help calm some stallions, and we know that that can decrease sperm count and live sperm and can contribute to increased morphologically abnormal sperm. As we touched on earlier, synthetic testosterone given can certainly have a pretty profound effect long-term on our stallion's fertility. So stress. This is one of the most important factors. I've been saying that on all the factors, but stress is a huge component of reducing fertility or changing hormonal levels. And I think it's one that's easy to dismiss, in that I think when we tend to think of stress in a horse, we think of a horse who paces his box or is always working up in a sweat or is running around the paddock. But stress comes in many different forms. And it basically is anything which challenges a normal physiological response in a horse. So stress can come in the form of changes in routine. It can be in the form of nutritional insufficiencies or deficiencies, fatigue, injury, illness, different handlers, different medications, really high temperatures. So again, some of the regions stallions go in, and particularly in Australia, some regions get really, really, really hot in summer, and that in itself can be a form of stress for the stallion. We know that when a stallion is under chronic, so ongoing stress, that the body preferentially produces cortisol, so that's the stress hormone, over testosterone. So the longer stress is present and the more stress is happening, the more cortisol is produced, and in turn, less testosterone is produced. We know that stress can affect sperm motility and morphology. We know that stress interferes with the hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis and the hypothalamus pituitary testes or gonadal axis. We know that the more stress there is, the more free radical damage there is, and that in turn affects both the production of testosterone but also the sperm themselves. It decreases testosterone synthesis in Leydig cells. And again, chronically, when cortisol levels are remaining quite high, a horse is under constant stress, they tend to have increased body fat levels, which increases estrogen levels and reduces testosterone levels. So again, stress is something which is easy to dismiss, but its effect on reproduction and fertility is huge. In terms of stress, I tend to view it a bit as a bucket or threshold concept. So a horse will be able to tolerate so much stress. Each bit of stress, each stressful situation, a bit of illness here, nutritional deficiency here, a changed environment here, it'll build up. So you'll get to a certain level, you'll have a bucket, and it can take so much. When that bucket tips over, when that horse goes over that stress threshold, that is when you have problems. Now, different horses have different size buckets, and different horses or different stallions will come to you with a certain amount of stuff already in that bucket. So what one stallion can cope with and what one stallion's stress threshold is may be much, much, much lower than another stallion. So keep that in mind when you've got one stallion that is struggling with fertility and his routine is much the same as everyone else. One of the many reasons can be his stress threshold has been met much earlier than the others. Again, I just want to drum home that stress is not only psychological, so it's not just that worked up horse, although that certainly can contribute, but it can be physiological too. So again, those nutritional insufficiencies or deficiencies. And just to really emphasize that, a relaxed horse can be under a lot of physiological stress, and this in turn impacts fertility and libido. A really interesting aspect worth covering is the use of lubricants. So there was a brilliant study done in 2019 by Serafani et al. They found that many of our commonly used non-spermicidal lubricants, so everyday lubes we'd use for covering with our stallions and mares, are potentially toxic to sperm. There were different brands with different effects, and we also found that the more lubricant was used, the more pronounced the effect. So again, whether you're using an AV with your stallion, again, for your AI, or you're doing live cover, be really aware of lubricant use. Also, it's really common to think a little bit of lube's good, a lot more lube's better, but definitely not only should you be aware of the type of lubricant you're using, but also the amount. The longer too that semen is in contact with the lube, the more detrimental effects. So again, you might have covered a mare, live cover, use lube, taken a sperm sample, put it under a microscope, semen sample, it looks good under microscope, but the more time that semen or the sperm is in contact with the lube, the more harmful the lubricant is. And remember that that lube goes into the mare too when the semen goes in, so that sperm has got constant contact with that lubricant. So just be really aware of that. We certainly need to consider the unique temperament of a stallion in terms of fertility and libido. So horsemanship is an important consideration. Who's handling the horse, their understanding of horses. Again, particularly when we're in a commercial breeding setting, it can be quite easy to take a mechanistic approach, but we need to remember that our stallions are living, feeling animals. And really, as those who work closely with stallions will attest, they have some of the biggest personalities or characters out there. So really understanding a horse. We want people who are handling the horses and doing the covers with stallions to be really patient and have a really even-keeled temper. We know that our own cortisol levels and our own stress levels and our own heart rate can have a direct impact on that of the horses. So the calmer, more relaxed and more capable your handlers are, the better the effects of stallions. We know that there are stallions that are shy breeders. And going back to those older or smarter stallions, they read their mares very, very well. So when we're doing live cover, and they often know better than us when that mare is primed for cover. So if you've got a stallion who's heavily booked and you're trying to get as many mares into him as you can and balance your covers, if a mare's not prime ready and you've got a smart stallion, you can have quite a struggle and get nowhere. So on that, considerations with those who are handling stallions, make sure they're confident. A horse will pick up on that all the time. Make sure the handler is calm. So again, remembering that a person's stress levels and cortisol levels can directly influence the stallions and a horses. Have patience, and it's so much easier said than done, particularly when you've got a lot of stallions and you've got a lot of mares booked in. But try your best not to be in a rush, because the more you're in a rush, the higher your stress levels, the higher cortisol levels, and that flows onto the stallion. And you can guarantee the day you need to get a lot of covers done and you're in a rush, they're the days that you'll be stuck in the barn for hours, really struggling with those stallions. So some considerations with our aging stallions, as we touched on earlier, testosterone levels naturally decline in our older stallions. We need to consider increased peripheral aromatase conversion. So that's our increased production of estrogen or conversion of testosterone to estrogen, because those older stallions have higher levels of fat tissue and less muscle tissue, and just hormonal changes in an older horse. For our older stallions, particularly those who've had a very busy breeding or stud career, if their nutrition has not been on point right along their breeding career, they are more likely to have depleted nutrient stores. And remembering that there are so many crucial nutrients to healthy sperm and healthy testosterone levels. So the more mares the stallions cover, the older they are, the more those levels have the potential to be depleted. The older stallion is likely to have more accumulated stress, again, just because of their age and their exposure and what they've been through. Again, changes in body composition, so they tend to lose muscle mass and increase fat mass. As was in the slide before, our oldest stallions tend to be seriously smart and know when a mare is primed for cover. I think we really need to stop and appreciate what years and years and years of shuttling can do to a stallion. So again, our dual hemisphere stallions, and the potential accumulated changes in their circadian rhythm. And older stallions also more at risk of vascular integrity, so changes in blood flow and fluid flow due to changes in blood vessels. Just briefly, some other factors which we won't get into detail on due to time tonight, but I think we need to think of timing of routine vaccinations. So again, when we give our horse various vaccinations, there are alterations in immune function for 2 weeks, and generally about 2 weeks, which is what we want. That's how vaccinations work, to prime the immune system. But when our horse's immune system is under that increased stress, they go through increased levels of nutrients, there are changes in temperature and things like that. So where possible, timing those routine vaccinations well away from that spermatogenesis period, which is going to have a flow-on effect. Certainly in cases of infertility and subfertility, you need to consider sexually transmitted diseases and infection. Again, in sub and infertility, we need to think of autoimmune factors, so sperm antibodies. Thyroid function is a really important factor, particularly in our older stallions. Hard to test for or accurately for, but knowing a horse's case history and going through everything thoroughly and its physical examination thoroughly and supplement and medication use can alert you to some of those factors. For a stallion really struggling with libido and testosterone levels, harem setups can, not all the time, but can in some cases be quite useful, although they're not always easy to implement from a practical viewpoint, particularly if you've got a lot of stallions and you've got limited space. So touching on gastrointestinal health, and again, jump on either to Pets Diag website or my own Optim Equine to go and view the webinar we did on gastrointestinal health. But gastrointestinal microflora, intestinal membrane integrity, and oral health in our horse or our stallion can all influence fertility and can do so significantly. In terms of oral health, make sure your stallion is getting at least an annual dental check by a qualified dentist, equine dentist, or equine vet who's well cued and well trained in dentistry. Gut health is important because it's responsible for the digestion and absorption of nutrients, remembering that testosterone and sperm and semen all need really healthy levels of specific nutrients to be produced. In terms of B group vitamins and vitamin K, a healthy hindgut synthesizes them in a horse, and B group vitamins particularly are needed for hormonal production and neurotransmitter production. So again, looking into both fertility and libido. Gut health is intimately linked to immune function, inflammation levels, gut-brain axis, so again, that GABA production, Metabolic rate. So again, we want a decent metabolic rate in our horse to help with that body composition. It's needed for skin and coat health, so to help our stallions look good. Thyroid function. So again, we can't expect our horses to be at their fertile best if their gastrointestinal health isn't at its best. In terms of feeding and nutrition, we can make huge impacts on our stallions' health and fertility and libido in these areas. And they are some of the simplest things we can implement. Doesn't need to be fancy. And it's also where we tend to make some of the biggest mistakes or impair or inhibit our stallions' fertility. The great news is because they're basic and because they're everyday things, they can be changed and changed quite easily. So the most common mistakes I would see in terms of fertility and libido in our stallion is overfeeding our stallions, feeding them really high energy or really high concentrate feeds, well above their needs. I think there's several reasons why we do this. One is we want our stallions to look good, particularly in the Southern Hemisphere as a general rule, or particularly in Australia. We tend to associate with heavier stallions with being more fertile. And unfortunately, that's not the case necessarily. And we know that increased fat tissue can really hurt fertility through multiple mechanisms. So again, resulting in excess body weight and fat. Nutritional insufficiencies and deficiencies. Now, it's quite ironic. We often overfeed our horses in terms of an energy perspective, but underfeed them in that we don't give them enough of those key minerals and nutrients and antioxidants needed for really healthy sperm and testosterone levels. So again, I call this overfed horses, but undernourished. Often when a horse or a stallion is fatiguing throughout the season, it can have been going really well and then puts the brakes on and gets really tired. Often our natural knee-jerk reaction is to increase their feed, thinking, well, he's tired, give him more feed. The reason he's tired certainly can be from insufficient nutrition, but it's generally not. It generally comes back to fitness levels. And again, not having our stallions properly fit prior to the season. And it can come back to testosterone levels. And you can feed those stallions all you want, but it's not going to help them when its issues are not because it's not being fed enough. Because again, in most cases, we're actually overfeeding our stallions. On that, it's really important to remember that body condition alone doesn't necessarily equate to a good nutritional status. So we can have a horse that looks to be doing well. And again, remembering that it's a bit of an Australian bias, but we tend to keep our stallions quite heavy. Just because he's carrying good condition doesn't mean he's got good nutritional reserves of those key minerals in particular, but also some of those vitamins. Something that's often overlooked is that if a stallion becomes ill, so gets any infection, if he obtains an injury, and particularly if he's on certain medications, his nutritional requirements and the way he will metabolize those nutrients, they become quite different. They generally become quite elevated and or their absorption becomes impaired. So keep in mind that if you've got a stallion that at any stage, whether it's pre-season or during the season, becomes ill, or becomes injured or goes on particular medications, his nutritional requirements and those nutrients that affect fertility can really change quite significantly. So again, just to recap on some of the most common dietary mistakes I typically see in terms of stallion fertility and libido is feeding them diets which are excessively high in concentrated feeds and well above their energy levels. Often their diets are really low or too low for that stallion's needs in terms of dry matter or fibre or roughage. The typical stallion diet is excessively high in omega-6 fatty acids and proportionally low in omega-3 fatty acids. And we often feed to promote excess body condition in a stallion as opposed to feeding to promote fertility. So in terms of basics in the role of diet and fertility, We need to ensure that they've got sufficient energy on board for their needs, but certainly not excessive to their needs. We want to, by and large, as a general rule, increase their omega-3 fatty acid content of their diet, particularly EPA and DHA, and decrease the omega-6 fatty acids. Now, omega-6s are typically what we find in the majority of our vegetable oils, our high-fat feeds, so our calming or high-energy, low-heating feeds for stallions. They are notoriously high in omega-6 fatty acids. And when omega-6 fatty acids are high and omega-3 fatty acids are low, that drives inflammation and can have some pretty deleterious effects on testosterone levels and seminal parameters. I tend to see that a lot of diets are quite low in really key minerals needed for healthy sperm, needed for healthy testosterone levels, and particularly the ratios between certain minerals. We need to ensure that we've got good levels of key amino acids in our stallion's diet. For stallion with fertility issues, certainly there are key antioxidants which we can use to support fertility parameters and seminal parameters, so they're important. We need to remember that the horse needs good nutrition, or the stallion needs good nutrition, not only for his fertility, but his health as well. On this, just to sort of hammer home nutrition a bit, it's quite useful to think about what's contained in the stallion's ejaculate. So there's zinc in there, there's fructose, there's calcium, there's magnesium, there's protein. So we think every time a stallion ejaculates or covers a mare, the more he depletes those nutrients. Now, in terms of fructose, that's no big deal. That's easily produced. But in terms of our minerals, the more a stallion covers, the more he churns through those minerals. And the only way he gets them is to consume them through his diet, properly absorb them. So again, touching on one of the many ways in which ulcer medications can affect nutritional status and sperm health is by preventing or inhibiting the absorption of particularly some of those key minerals. But the more a stallion covers or more his sperm's collected, the more he churns through those key minerals. And if he's not getting them in his diet, then they're depleted from his body, taken out of his body stores. He's got a finite amount of them. So if they're not coming in their diet in sufficient amounts, it will have effects on fertility and on overall health. So again, just to re-emphasize that mineral and nutritional requirements can be well beyond what we would consider normal needs for a stallion, yet their overall energy requirements may not be. So just keep that in mind. Just to touch on immune health, so many of the nutrients needed for good immune health are the same that are needed for good fertility. So if a stallion has poor immune health, again, if he has an infection, if he's not doing well, often those nutrients that are needed for fertility are diverted to help support immune function. That's why often you'll get a stallion with poor immune health and concurrent poor fertility levels. Often too, many of those stallions with poor immune health or immune compromises will go on any number of medications, including your antibiotics and anti-inflammatories, which can further impact fertility. Now, I love to use good supplements when I'm treating my stallions, particularly those with fertility or libido issues, and they are really key to turning around a lot of our cases. However, we really need to be cautious with supplements for many reasons. The main ones being purity. So depending on what part of the world you're in, there are differing laws, and in most places there are very little laws in regulating what goes into a supplement. So a supplement on the market could be sold as containing X, Y, and Z and contain none of that. So we really, in many cases, unless you're buying strictly produced products, products produced under strict regulations, you effectively don't know what you're putting in your stallion. And again, some of those supplements that are commonly used are really high in things like heavy metals. Again, substances which displace key minerals needed for healthy fertility. So be really cautious of any supplements you use in your horse. Quality goes along with purity, but is also a really important consideration. I think it's also really good to keep in mind that some supplements, which can be really useful in some stallions, in some cases of fertility, can be really quite detrimental in other cases. There's a particular stallion and case that comes into mind. It was an older stallion whose fertility levels and sperm count had suddenly dropped off. He'd been quite a fertile horse all his life, and then his levels suddenly dropped off one season. In response to that, in order to try and help this stallion, stud management had done a bit of research and read that carnitine was a really good fertility supplement. Now, carnitine can be most beneficial if we've got a stallion with poor sperm motility. It's certainly not the only supplement I'd give in that case. I would definitely take a very thorough case history and give it with its cofactors. But this stallion was given really high doses of carnitine long-term without cofactors and without any plan to review. So he's kept on really high dose carnitine. He didn't have any issues with sperm motility. So again, where we would use L-carnitine or acetyl L-carnitine is in terms of poor motility. This stallion didn't have any issues with motility. He had issues with testosterone levels and sperm count. We know that carnitine used in high dose can impact thyroid function. And again, thyroid function tends to decline somewhat in older stallions, and it certainly is impaired by nutritional insufficiencies and deficiencies. Things like iodine and selenium. This stallion's diet was low in both those things. So one of the many contributing factors from my perspective to this stallion's poor fertility levels was his high carnitine supplementation. It was one of the first things I addressed with him. That stallion, despite the fact that he was 17 after the season after his initial treatment, so started treating him about 3.5, 4 months before stud season, he then went on to have his most fertile season and continues to go really well. So just keep in mind that even supplements, which are really good in some cases, can be really quite harmful if not employed correctly in other cases. So when supplementing, look at the whole picture you're treating. So again, I think with many supplements, we tend to go, this supplement's good for fertility, so all our stallions will go on it. We need to be really careful with how we use them and use them with specific purpose. So identify treatment aims and the pathways you're targeting to improve a stallion's fertility. If a supplement doesn't fit a treatment aim, then don't use it. And really don't use supplements just because. So again, you'll find people when questioning, they'll use a supplement and you'll ask them why they're using a supplement. And they'll say, because it's good. If you're unable to identify that specific mechanism of action of a specific supplement and how it is going to help that stallion, then from my perspective, don't use it. So stallions are valuable horses. Each individual stallion should have an individual approach. Treat the individual stallion in front of you. Again, it can be really easy to categorize a stallion as, a stallion with low testosterone levels, a stallion with low sperm count, and then just add herbs and nutrients that way. You really need to take a step back and look what is happening for the horse as a whole, in its environment, its management, its dietary intake, its medication use. We want to identify why they have that low sperm count or why they have those low testosterone levels and then address accordingly. So again, if you've got an old, overweight horse who has a low sperm count, or if you've got a younger, fitter horse who's not too long off the track that has a low sperm count, then your treatment approaches should be very, very different. So identify and address the causes of poor fertility or poor libido. You want to do your thorough veterinary physical exam, your semen analysis, take a really thorough case history, go through and fully review all current and or past medications, do a full review of diet and supplements, and actually go through the diets and supplement use with whoever's feeding them. Again, you can find that people forget they'll be feeding something or supplementing something. So really go through the client, go through their feed room, see what they're using. Really important to remember that there's generally more than one cause of their poor fertility. As we've gone through this presentation, you can see that there are so many things that can compromise fertility, and treat the individual stallion in front of you. So in terms of naturopathic intervention, I allow at least 2 full months of treatment to see full effects on semen parameters, remembering that spermatogenesis takes 55 to 57 days. If a horse has coexisting health conditions, then you may need to allow longer. And personally, I do like to allow longer, but sometimes is the case. We tend to take a reactionary approach, and we will want to do something when we've got problems, not a preventative approach. If a stallion has significant nutritional deficiencies, insufficiencies, or metal toxicities, then we need to allow longer to see the full effects. It's not to say you won't make inroads, because you certainly can make inroads, but to see the full beneficial effects on his fertility parameters, you'll need to allow longer. Anecdotally, in terms of sperm motility, I've seen a lot quicker turnaround. And these have been in horses who have got good sperm counts, good sperm morphology, good testosterone levels. And I think because the sperm is structurally quite good, but maybe not able to use the substrate so well, and when we address that, we can often get good results much, much quicker. So in any fertility or libido case, we need to address or ask, what is the problem? Is a stallion's poor fertility the actual problem, or is it a result of another health issue or problem? So remembering that gonadal function, so testy function, sperm production, are low down in terms of the chain of events in a stallion's health. And generally what's contributing to that is something that's higher up the chain. So immune function, thyroid function, HPA function. And on that note, that brings us to the end of the presentation. My contact details are on that slide, so feel free to jump onto my website, optimequine.com. You'll find plenty of info on different issues in terms of stallion fertility and health, but a whole host of different horse health issues. I also post quite regularly on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn, so be sure to jump on there. And if anyone's got any questions, then feel free to fire away. I appreciate that this webinar's gone for quite a bit of time. So again, feel free to email me if there's anything more specific that you want info on. Thank you, Marta. Yeah, it is amazing. So Marta's just said she had no idea the effect of some of our phthalates and things like that contained in our main conditioners, how they can affect fertility, and they certainly can. And yes, I believe the webinar is recorded and will be on YouTube and Pets Diag, and I will upload it to the Optim Equine website. Sorry, my dog's making noises in the background. She's just come inside. If that's all, then have a great rest of your day or evening, and thank you very much.
Camilla, thank you very much. There is a lot of noise because this parade of winners competition. So yeah, thank you very much for your webinar. It was a great honor to have you here, and I'm sure that we'll be back with you as a host in the next webinar. So thank you very much, and see you again soon.
Thanks very much, Martin, and thank you everyone who came along today or tonight.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.